Welcome to Every Move Explained Episode 1, a new series that I will be doing in which I will go over different games and break those games down move by move. And so let's begin. This first game is a Rudolf Spielmann versus Robert Wahle game that took place in 1926 in Vienna. And so this game begins with e4 by Rudolf Spielmann. And e4 controls the center, attacking the d5 square of black and his f5 square. A good first move. And his opponent, Robert Wahle, responds with e6, the French defense. And this is a little more restrictive, and it does keep his position a little boxed in, but it controls the d5 square and also the f5 square. So it does fight for the center, and it allows black to push forward with d5, and it will guard that pawn when it moves forward. And so the game continues with d4. And so one pawn in the center is good, but two is better. And so with d4, white controls the center even more, having both pawns placed two squares ahead. And these forward pawn moves both allow his pieces, bishops and queen, to be developed from the back rank. And so black responds with d5, fighting for the center, increasing his space in the center, and it also allows the f8 bishop to have room to develop. And next, knight to c3. So this move protects the e4 pawn, which is being attacked by black's d pawn. It also develops a piece off the back rank, and it attacks the d5 and e4 squares. And so black moves knight to f6, further fighting for control in the center, developing his piece, and it attacks this e4 pawn. It also guards the d5 pawn. And so here we have an exchange in the middle. White captures this d5 pawn, forcing black to make a decision whether to capture with his pawn or his knight. And so black captures with the pawn, which is a better move, as now the pawns are equal in the center. They have equal space in the center. And so the game continues with bishop to g5. And so this move pins the knight to the queen. And if this pin is not broken, this bishop may capture the knight on f6 and force black to break his kingside pawns by recapturing with the pawn. As if he captures with the queen, it will leave this d5 pawn unprotected, and that can be captured by the knight, and he would just be ahead a pawn. So on black's move, he breaks this pin with bishop to e7. And so we move on. And now bishop to d3. So this develops his bishop. It is posted on a good square here on d3, which commands this diagonal leading all the way up to the king side to the h7 pawn. And it also controls the center. And now knight to c6. This attacks the center. It attacks white's d4 pawn, which is now unprotected. And it also threatens to move up to b4, attacking this bishop on d3. And so white responds with knight to e2. And generally this knight would move to f3, but here the knight moves to e2, which guards this d4 pawn, but also by not moving to f3, it takes away the possibility of a pin by the c8 bishop moving to g4. So now if this bishop attacks this knight, the bishop could just be chased away with an f3 pawn move. And so the game continued with knight to b4. And so this move attacks the bishop and threatens to take away the bishop pair from white, leaving black with a small advantage of this bishop pair. And usually it's a good idea to take the bishop pair away from your opponent and try and keep the bishop pair for yourself, as two bishops are better than one, as they cover both colored squares on the board. And if you lose one of your bishops, then you will be weak in the color squares of the bishop that you've lost. And so the game continues now with knight to g3. And so this move is interesting. It threatens to place a piece on this f5 square, and we find out later in the game that it also entices black to push a pawn forward to g6, preventing this knight or another piece from moving up to f5. And it also, after this g6 pawn push, will create weaknesses in the dark squares around the black king side. And so the game continued with knight capturing the bishop. So black has taken away the bishop pair from white, but he has done this at the expense, after queen recaptures, he has done this at the expense of development. So here we see that white has 4 pieces developed and black only has 2. So white is already ahead in piece development. And so the game continues with this g6 move, preventing the knight from moving to f5. And so now we have castling by white, which places his king in a safe area away from the center of the board, and it brings this rook closer to the center. And so now c6, this move bolsters the d5 pawn, prevents the knight from moving forward to b5. And also it releases an avenue for the queen to possibly move out along this diagonal. And rook at a to e1. So here white gains places the rook on a better position to influence this e file. And also there's a threat here where now this bishop is pinned to the king, and so white is threatening to just capture the knight on f6, and the bishop would not be able to recapture as it is pinned to the king by this rook. And so castle by black, removing this pin on the bishop, getting his king into relative safety on the king side, although he does have weaknesses here with these dark squares. And now an interesting move that begins an attack by white. He captures this bishop, and by removing that bishop, it leaves these dark squares vulnerable around black's king, as the bishop is usually the best piece to place on g7 to cover these weak squares caused by the pawn push to g6. And so black recaptures, and he is ahead in material now. And now we have queen to f3, placing further pressure on this knight, which is now pinned to the queen. And so the king moves forward to help in the defense of this knight. And now a very interesting move. this knight sacrifices itself on e4, and once it is captured, it will allow this other knight to move up to e4 to place even more pressure on this knight. So pawn captures. Now this pawn is attacking the queen. Black is ahead in material, but as we see here, the attack is beginning. This knight has recaptured. He is in the center, attacking this knight on f6 and placing a lot of pressure on black's position. And we already see in the evaluation white is well ahead. And the game continues with queen to e6, moving here to get out of this pin on the knight, but it is already too late for black here. Black, the best he could have done is possibly sacrifice his queen in these further moves here. So we see bishop capturing the f6 knight, and the king is in check, and already black is losing here, and there's not much he can do. If he wanted to stay alive a little longer, he could trade his queen, but then he would be behind in material. And so the game continues with a retreat from the king getting out of check, and the queen moves up to f4 here, threatening to move to h6 and then follow up with a checkmate on g7. And here black resigned, having no wish to play the rest of the game out, where he would either be checkmated or he would have to sacrifice his queen, but then he would be behind in material and eventually lose. And so that was the first of a series in this Every Move Explained series of games that I will be doing. And I hope you enjoyed this. I thought that was an interesting game and a nice little attack there at the end. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have, please like and subscribe, and feel free to leave any comments or suggestions. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.